what I would like to see going into 6th edition D&D. These are the things that I would need to see as design principles, as mechanical constructs, in order for me to be interested in playing the next edition of D&D. I think 5e is pretty much shot. I don't think there's any chance of me coming back. They are fully unwilling to work on the issues that 5e has. And to be honest, I don't blame them entirely, because why change what's selling well? You could argue that that's a pretty jaded position, but I think it's true. As long as 5th edition is selling well, they have no reason to change it. And in order to change all the things that I think are wrong with the system and need to be fixed, you're functionally writing a new system anyways. So 6th edition will happen eventually. Might not be for another 10 years, but it will happen eventually. You've got to make a new edition to sell more products. I especially if one D&D doesn't sell well, it'll happen a little bit sooner. So what do I need to see in 6th edition for it to actually entice me to try it and come back to Dungeons & Dragons? So the big thing is that you need to have a philosophy of everyone gets to have fun. Everyone needs to have toys. Everyone needs to have abilities. Everyone needs to be able to engage with the game on basically the same level. So I need there to not be a martial caster disparity. It's not hard to get rid of if you're doing it from scratch. You just, 4th edition did it, and you don't need to necessarily go all that way with it. In late 4th edition, there was a series of products called the Essentials line. Now, these are much maligned books, rightfully so. They were, I think, poorly conceived. But the part that you could take away from it is that weapon users and casters did behave quite differently. They had different power structures, as opposed to previous products where everyone kind of had the same power structure, psionics accepted. You have, 2 at wills at level 1, 1 encounter power, 1 daily power, all at level 1, and then level 2 to get a utility power, and so on. Everyone got the same general category of powers at every level. And then your level 1 features would define how your class actually operates and the way that your class approaches the game. In Essentials, they changed that up a bit. You would get features at different levels as opposed to all at level 1, which I'm torn on. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then your powers would come online at different levels and do different kinds of things. So the Essentials Wizard still got the basic, at will encounter daily utility powers. And I think it was the exact same progression as a standard 4e wizard. But then the fighter would get, instead of getting at will powers, they would get, or instead of getting at will attack powers, they would get powers that triggered when they did a basic attack. So here you could see this sort of precursor to the shift where martial characters are primarily just doing basic attacks with enhancements. In 5e, they kind of dropped the enhancements part. So you could do something like that. That, while it was, I think, poorly implemented while it was poorly implemented in Essentials, it didn't have to be. I think that was just probably the result of very limited playtesting. The Essentials products felt a little bit rushed, as they were trying to shift gears to recapture an audience that just fully was not ever going to be interested in 4th edition. The boat had sailed. They were not getting it back, but they were desperate to do so. So I think something like that could work. You could jimmy the numbers, do good playtesting to make sure that the characters remain functional and viable. Because Essentials fighters were good through heroic tier. Maybe at the late heroic tier, they started to drop off a bit. In Paragon, they definitely dropped off a bit. You could really start to notice the difference between them and a normal 4e class, severely underpowered at that tier. But they don't have to be. I think that's just a result of poor playtesting. You could come up with new abilities that keep them up to par with other classes. So I'm not saying that everyone needs to go to the same ability structure like they were at the beginning of 4th edition, although you could. I would not argue with that, but it's not necessary. And a lot of people did have a problem with it, just sort of on a conceptual level. I disagree with their position that casters and marshals need to get abilities at like different rates. But like, fine, you can write a game like that. But you need to be able to give abilities to marshals. If you just start with the base assumption that marshals are doing normal things and then casters are doing supernatural things, your game's doomed as far as class balance is concerned. There's just no way you can design around that. So that's number one. Number two, they need to have good math in the game. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, there needs to be a progression of attack values, defense values, damage values. These things need to scale at a predictable, prescribed rate. Whether that is faster or slower, or maybe attack and defense values don't scale at all. You have true bounded accuracy, which 5e said it was going to do and then didn't. They have this sort of like non-committal bounded accuracy where numbers do scale, but oddly, and only some of them do. Instead of that, you could have, do what Pathfinder 2nd edition does, where, you get +1 to basically everything at every level. Or you could do no level scaling. Nothing scales automatically aside from probably hit points and damage. So those are two possibilities. But either way, whichever way you go with it, or you could go back to 4th editions at half level. I think that's a good middle ground. But either way, you need to have a standard progression of power from first level to whatever your max is. Probably 20. 20 is more popular than 30. I don't know, whatever, doesn't matter. It's pretty arbitrary. Because if you have something like 5e's, like, some classes scale this fast, other classes scale this fast, other classes hardly scale at all, then it's impossible to balance. And that really comes down to, like, what is the value of a feat? What is the value of a magic item? How fast should you get magic items? How much money should the party get at any given level? And how can you use that money to increase individual character power on magic items or rituals or whatever it is that you're going to do? It's impossible to say if you don't have standardized progression of power for the characters. So you need to approach the game with the assumption that everyone should have fun and not just the casters. You should standardize character power progression. I would say you need to assume, I don't want to say you need to assume grid-based combat, because playing Theater of the Mind is a valid way to want to play the game. I don't think it's really a feasible way, because you got to throw out kind of a lot of rules functionally to play Theater of the Mind in D&D, even in 5th edition, where that is kind of the default. But you need to have the assumption that a lot of people are going to be playing on a grid in mind. And you need to, like, put that into the base rules. Say, here's grid-based combat, here's Theater of the Mind, and here's how these two things interact. And you could even write it into class features. Like, if you are in a battle grid situation, you have this ability. If you are in Theater of the Mind, it works this way instead. You can have those two modes of play exist side by side, and then you can even switch during the campaign. Like, sometimes we'll do a Theater of the Mind fight for, like, minor stuff, or cinematic combat, and then, like, sometimes we'll go to grid based if this is like a puzzle combat. Like, you guys have to figure out how to beat the enemy under certain circumstances, and there's a really solidified win condition. That'd be good for grid-based combat. If you want something a little bit more cinematic, like you're going to be doing stuff with elevation and you're going to be, moving a lot. Maybe the battlefield moves across an area over time, and, there's like a lot going on, and be kind of a pain in the butt to track on a grid. Do that Theater of the Mind. If you have those two modes of play, both written into the rules and equally supported, that's the underline, equally supported, then it can work. But what we need to do is move away from this idea that like you can get away with this like skeleton of rules and some like assumed flavor for characters and for abilities, and move more towards like, here's a solid, well thought out framework, this like base set of rules that are interesting and mechanically deep on their own. Feel free to reflavor these things as you desire because they work mechanically. So reflavoring them is not going to break the game. Once you have that, you can do a lot. So everyone has toys. What was the second thing I just talked about? Standard progression of character power. Support for grid-based combat, because a lot of the problems of 5th edition when it comes to like playing on a grid, which a lot of people do, I would say more than half the player base does this, is that it's just not technically in the rules. It's considered a variant rule with some additional rules supporting it in Xanathar's Guide, I believe. But like, you have to buy a whole extra book for the basic way to play the game, the way most people play the game. Seems bad. So those three things, the bottom line, I guess, aside from like specific mechanics, I need to know that the designers are making a good game. And they're not just filling out a checklist of, all right, this is D&D, so we got to have a fighter, we got to have a wizard, got to have a cleric, got to have a rogue, and then additional sort of like hybrid class ideas, the ranger, the druid, etc. Surrounding that. And, the fighter has to wear armor. Check. Fighter is proficient in armor. The wizard has to have spell slots. Check. Wizard has spell slots. The rogue has to have sneak attack that scales at a particular rate. Like, these are distraction designs. They don't necessarily contribute to like the fantasy or the fun. They're like, you can't design a game by checklist, because I can come up with a checklist and say like, you want to play a fighter? You have armor proficiency and you use weapons. That's your class. And you're going to say, what about features? And I'm like, fighters don't get features, bud. You use weapons, you have armor. I have designed a fighter. You want to play a wizard? You don't get armor, and you're going to be casting a firebolt every turn. You are casting a spell, therefore you are a wizard. You have a spell book. What's in it? Firebolt. Maybe you'll find other spells if the DM is feeling generous. You can design these checklist classes in any way you like, but that doesn't make it a good game. You've got to have solid, functional mechanics that create interesting decisions for the players to make. And right now, the designers aren't really interested in doing that. They want to say, okay, you have to get ability score increases at these levels, so you're probably not going to get any features. If you actually look at like the unique features that classes get, particularly marshals and half-casters, like they don't get a lot that's actually unique to their class. They're pretty few and far between, because once you take out like the extra attack, which counts as a whole level of progression for most classes that get it, I think. And when you take out ability score increases, which is standard for everybody, like once you take all these things out, the class is half empty. Like, you get a bunch of stuff at first level, second level, maybe third level to make your class functional. And then after that, very few classes get really anything of significance, unless you are a full caster, in which case you get spells, which are extremely powerful. So what I need from 6th edition, if I am going to come back to D&D, is I need to know that the designers are making a good game. And they're designing it as a game, because the game part of the role-playing game is what is fun for me and what I am drawn to it for. Because I can role-play in any system. I don't need a system to role-play. Before I started playing D&D, I started playing in 2003. Before that, I had like 15 years almost. No, not 15 years. Probably closer to 10 years. 10 years of largely role-playing without a system. That was like my go-to thing for spending time. I was playing with my friends. We went role-playing. We would come up with stories and characters and play through all this. We don't need a system to role-play. Now, some systems can facilitate stronger roleplay by having mechanics that encourage certain behaviors, consequences for actions, things like that, ways to interact with the game world in interesting and evocative ways. There are mechanics that can encourage storytelling. D&D generally doesn't use them. So, like, which version of D&D is the easiest to roleplay in? Any of them. Role-playing in D&D is not based on the system. So what's left is playing the game. You need to have a good game to draw me back in. Otherwise, I'm going to go play the version of D&D that is the best game and roleplay just as hard as any other. For unrelated reasons and reasons that I can't necessarily articulate right now, although I may be able to later, I think 4th edition is the easiest version of D&D to roleplay in because I approach D&D from the perspective of heroic fantasy. And I made a video about heroic fantasy, but it is like acting like a hero is justified in 4th edition, where I don't really feel like it is justified in other versions. But anyways, so I need 6th edition to be a good game first. If they want to start incorporating role-play mechanics, again, they kind of like made a half effort to do that with regards, like, you know, the personality traits, bonds, flaws, ideal. It doesn't really work. Didn't really land, I think. I think a lot of people don't really use them, it feels like to me. Most tables that I've played with don't really use them. We fill them out. We don't use them. So, like, something a little bit stronger than that, I would say, if they're gonna do a mechanic like that. And they don't have to. They genuinely don't have to. Like, it wouldn't bother me at all if 6th edition comes out and there's no, like, role-playing facilitating mechanics. Because, like I said, I don't need them. And I think most other people don't need them either. What I need is strong character ideas that can work well at the table and create a good gameplay experience. If I'm having fun playing the game, I'm going to roleplay the hell out of that character. Which makes it kind of hard for me to roleplay in 5th edition because the characters don't really feel like anything. They feel like a checklist of abilities. And that's not fun.